I'm joined today by Carole Pluckrose and Ria Knowles, the artistic team behind our audio drama Notes from Dad's Room. Ria and Carole, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to see you again. And Carole, you're the artistic director at Boathouse Studios in Barking, where we actually recorded Notes from Dad's Room. And that's where you're speaking to us from today.
Indeed, in this very space.
Indeed. So it's nice to see you and the space again after our recording day. Whereabouts are you, Ria?
I am in my sitting room in North London.
Excellent. I am in, I was going to say sunny Rutland, but it's overcast Rutland today. So we're here to talk about Notes from Dad's Room. And I wonder if you could start by just giving us a little overview of what Notes from Dad's Room is and what it's about, please.
For sure. It's been a long journey. It started, actually, the inspiration for it started when my dad went into the last months of his life. He was given 4 weeks to live, but being the stubborn old guy that he always was, he actually hung on for 15 months. And during that time, like probably lots of us, when we realize that someone we love is on their way, instead of texting and phoning every single person, I started a Facebook group that ended up being about 100 people to update people on a regular basis, which originally had felt like it might be for 4 weeks, ended up being for 15 months. But what that did was it evoked a conversation about all aspects of mortality, death and dying, children, what we say to our kids, stories and things like that. And I would report the kind of conversations my dad and I were having. And that really was the source material, because it was a very powerful dialogue, and I'm sure lots of people do that. But I then wanted to use my theatre skills and my writing skills to begin to explore how that might communicate with an audience.
And I mean, it reads and feels very much like an autobiographical piece. Is it entirely autobiographical, or have you used elements of poetic and dramatic license?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the piece explores memory. Fundamentally, it's an exploration of a final part of a life and a father-daughter relationship, and it kind of explores memory. And of course, memory is entirely subjective, and so some of it, I think, is very accurate memory, probably, and some of it is definitely poetic license was used. I don't think it's possible it's not a verbatim account of that life, of course. But the process of writing and the care in which the writing was done was also actually fundamental to not just simply telling the story, but to making it work as a piece of drama.
I would use the term poetic license there quite advisedly, actually, because some of it, I know it's not written in verse, it's written in prose and dialogue, but some of it is actually quite poetic, actually, very beautiful language. And I think that, if anyone listens to the drama, I think the pacing of it at times feels a bit like poetry, actually.
Thank you. I mean, I think it goes off into a kind of other space, because I think the liminal space that you inhabit when you're alongside someone who's dying is a very curious space between the past and the present.
Yeah. And the audio drama is I think it's fair to say, just the latest iteration of Notes from Dad's Room, certainly not its first appearance in public. And you've both been involved in previous incarnations of it. So can you tell us a little bit about the gestation of Notes from Dad's Room as a play, please?
I'll hand over to you, Ria, if you're up for picking this up, seeing as I've just answered the first couple.
Yeah, so as Carole was saying, like, this was born out of her blog, and the first iteration of the play, we workshopped it. We just spent time in the studio reading it through, playing around with it, and putting it on its feet. And I think it's been through quite a lot of different versions. And I think our first kind of motivation was about making it a live performance and make it visual. And so a lot of our choices in terms of how we delivered it and how it was directed were to do with it being seen as a live piece. And having done that, we did a rehearsed reading in front of an invited audience. And then we revisited it after that. We had a little bit of breathing time and reflected upon where we'd got to at that point. And then we went back.
Do you remember, Ria, sorry to interrupt you, but do you remember when we started rehearsing during the pandemic?
Yeah.
When we were allowed to have 2 people in a room and we were exploring how we were going to take it forward, if we were going to have to use gloves and God knows what else. We played around in these very studios to explore how it would communicate. And in the end, because we'd got a potential run of the show, in the end we did it on Teams for pen to print, didn't we? As we experimented with a reading on.
We did. And I think we also played around with the structure quite a lot. So I think to start off with, it was less chronological, as you will hear it now. And I think the choice of which actor gave voice to which part was more abstract and looser. And I think as we went on, it became almost more logical, more chronological. Is that fair to say?
I think so, because I think initially we wanted it to be a bit like the way in which thinking works in your head.
A bit more of a dreamscape.
Something happens and it triggers us to go somewhere else in our mind. And so it had a kind of I always used to describe it as, this is a spine, this is a chronological spine, that's the thing that holds the play together, but it dips off as emotional triggers happen. But the more we worked on it, and in a way, I did wonder at the time whether we were being reductionist about it. But in the end, I felt that the chronological journey actually did, in fact, serve it better.
Yeah. And we ended up making choices which are a bit clearer about my voice being the younger half of the piece and Carole's voice being the older. And before, it wasn't that at all. It was more, I think those choices were more about how we could actually achieve it physically in the space. Whereas doing it in an audio format allowed us to make different choices for different reasons.
Yeah, I suppose I saw it as a kind of Carole's voice being the character in the now, in the contemporary character, and yours being
Carole's
Carole
voice
in the past, the flashbacks.
In the now and reflecting back. In the past.
And it does have that lovely kind of split narrative, which I think listeners will enjoy. It possibly take a little while to get used to, but I think once you get the hang of it, I think that works so well, actually. One thing that the first time I read it, Carole, I guess I thought of it as it had the feel of a one person, one woman play. But as we've explained, you've included a second voice performed by Ria. Why did you choose to do it that way and not just stick with that one woman play format?
It's a good question. I think because I wanted a kind of internal, external voice to be very clear, and I felt the kind of contrast would actually speak more powerfully to an audience. I mean, I did originally think of it as a one-woman play, but I just love the idea of kind of a sort of universality about it, I suppose. One of my questions was how to make something very specific have a universal voice, a kind of every woman, if you like. And I felt that by opening it to 2 voices, we moved closer towards that universality, if that makes any sense at all. I mean, that was my gut instinct about it. And every time we came back, also just the creative process of working with Ria. And I mean, I should say that Ria and I have worked with each other for many years, and I think the benefits of that kind of working dialogue and working relationship is such that it kind of really benefited the piece.
And I was going to ask you, right, because as Carole said, you've worked together on this and other projects before. How did it feel to be working with Carole, to tell a story that was so personal to her and her family. How did you get into that that sort of mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that you know, when you're working on something that is so autobiographical and so personal, you do have to approach it with a level of sensitivity and respect.
Mm,
But I also think that the themes within the play are very relatable. And for me personally as well, you know, I have experienced loss and bereavement. My father died when I was only 16. Um, and reflecting on how that affects families and dynamics, and you know, that was quite easy for me to access. I think also just the, you know, the themes around the coming of age and the teenage years, and then the pull between parents as you step into the world and you've got other influences, university politicizing you, and all of those things to me were just very universal and
mm.
easy for me to step into. Um,
And she is a joy to work with, may I say.
yeah, and I think, you know,
Oh
as
yes.
Carole said, we have worked together for a very long time. I've known Carole for half of my life. And we've done lots of theatre projects together. And I think working in theatre, you do break down barriers quite quickly, and you do get to know people quite intimately. So actually, um, sharing that kind of personal space is kind of part of the job, really. So yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah. And I think probably fair to say that some of my favourite scenes from this were the younger Carole, I guess, the coming of age stories of the younger Carole.
yeah.
You know, the road trip in America, being one of them, first fumblings with boys and all
Yeah, I
that
mean,
sort of thing.
everyone, you know, everyone can relate to that or has a similar, you know, stages in their life or those stepping stones or those milestones. So yeah.
Mm,
But I do think also, just coming back to the two voices, I do think that, you know, and this is more relevant when we did it live in front of an audience, but having a black actor and a white actor did throw up some interesting questions. And it is interesting looking at the play in those terms. It's interesting at looking at what is a universal human experience and what are the differences. How would the play how might the play be different if it was a black female voice as the author? Would
mm.
there be differences? Obviously, there's different cultural references, perhaps, but yeah, I just think that that's an interesting question to throw out there.
Yeah. I mean, Carole, what do you have any thoughts on, you know, how it might have been different for different different groups in society, I guess.
I guess I'm very conscious that I come from an Irish Catholic background,
Mm,
and I'm sure that the lens that I look through to write the piece is very influenced culturally by those experiences,
mm,
and I'm very specific about those. So it's out of the specific comes the universal. But I absolutely, I mean, these issues around the fact that, like, you know, the difference in our race, in our colour, came up whilst we were working on it. But for me, that was even more so, more just these things are universal. The specific references might be different,
Mm.
but the core human themes about loss and love are so endemic. They are so fundamentally part of who we all are that they take us to a different space. And, you
yeah.
know, that isn't to ignore or deny difference.
Mm,
It's to celebrate commonality.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, that's exactly the point I was going to make, and I think there is more that we will find, that anyone listening will find in common with the piece,
Yeah.
certainly on an emotional level, than they will find differences.
And actually, that does bring up for me something that was a constant kind of Jiminy Cricket on my shoulder throughout the writing process, which was the line between something being indulgent, internally so self-referential, and something that you have to ask yourself, why do I want anyone to listen to this work? Well, you know, and the big question is, so what?
Mm,
The big question with any piece of work, creative work I do, is so what?
mm,
And
Yeah. Sorry, I mean,
No, you go.
I was just going to say, going back to your question about what it was like to perform Carole's writing, and I think, you know, it's a real privilege to perform a play with the writer so present with you, and with a writer who will so easily go, yeah, get rid of that. Yeah, we don't need that bit. That bit is a bit self-indulgent, or that bit's not working. And to be in that organic process with the writer in the room performing it with you is a real, you know, that's a real treat. That's a real opportunity as an actor.
And for me as the writer, to have the voice that says, actually, that bit doesn't work. And not, and you know, it's a murder my darlings moment, isn't it? It's like, actually, do you know what I mean? We had there was a very, very poetic section, epilogue to the play that we loved, that went backwards in and out of it every single blooming iteration, but in the end it was definitely a murder my darling moment. And to be, from my point of view as a writer, why would I not want this to be the best it could be? So, you know, having that critical voice where that honesty and direct relationship was always about making the work the best that we could make it. And I'm sure if we, to be honest, I'm sure if we carried on working on it for another 10 years, we'd still want to make it better, you know, because I think that's the nature. It's always a tricky point when you say, okay, now it's done. And it's been a 7-year
never done, really, is it? It's never done.
Well, they always say a piece of art is never finished, it's abandoned. But I mean, just even on that point, we were making edits and changes to the script kind of between takes, weren't we, in the studio?
And also, I mean, I'd gone on a writing retreat to Morocco with the two people that did a lot of critical and editing for me, Claire and Jill. We sat for 10 hours doing the final edit, and talk about murder my darlings in that final edit before the final day that we did. You know, that was magical. And actually to have that much attention given to the detail and quality of the writing, and is a tremendous experience. I've had it a lot making theatre, but I hadn't had it quite so profoundly in terms of this script until those voices that really are there, and you just learn so much from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the one theme that I think is one that is very common and the most important theme running through this is that of death, and of the life that leads up to the death, and what your relatives are thinking at the time of a close one's death. So I suppose the final bit of this interview, I just want to think about, what are your ambitions for this audio drama of Notes from Dad's Room?
One of the things that I haven't mentioned in this discussion, because it's kind of tangential, I suppose, is that is that I trained to be a celebrant. I trained to be and I have an enormous privilege in writing ceremonies for funerals. And I think that was a very natural evolution from writing the play, actually. And I very much feel that the ability to engage fully and properly with discussions about death and dying without, and actually, to be honest, to sort of move away from some of the euphemisms that we use and just be really direct about it is incredibly important, because I don't think we always have a language for it. And it's still, I mean, there's a lot of growth in people talking about death, like death cafes and things like that, but I think it's still such a taboo that we still use a lot of euphemisms instead of actually having the ability to just be genuine and authentic in our dialogue about death, because in so doing, we have life, we have joy. And that's the thing I learned from my dad in his, you know, last months of his life. And you'll hear it in the play, you know, we went off on all sorts of virtual magical journeys. And it was just around the time of the referendum, and he was so engaged in the actual world, and that ability to just be truly grateful and precious about what we do have. That's what writing about death and dying and being a celebrant has meant to me. But so I would really love for people who listen to this to just engage with that, really. I hope it will speak to people who maybe are going through that process at the moment, or are worried about it or feel that, you know, there are directions they might want to go to some of the bereavement charities or talk to hospices, or, you know, I think we all have to get better at this, because it's the one guaranteed thing that is going to happen to us, all that and taxes.
Yes. Well, let's not talk about taxes, because
What about taxis? Have I got a taxi to take me from the studio?
I'll call you an Uber.
Thanks.
Ria, what about you? Who would you like to think of listening to this drama?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Carole just answered that brilliantly, so I'm not sure that I have much to add. But yeah, I think that, I totally agree. I think that death is a subject that's avoided a lot of the time. And so I think, talking about it head on is good and healthy. And I think also, from my experience of, being bereaved at a really young age, and my father's death was quite different from Carole's father's in the sense that it was very sudden. But I do live with a philosophy of, we don't know what's coming. We don't know when we're going to lose people. We know that we will, that is certain, but we don't know when or how. And so I think, having that sense of living for the moment with gratitude and with love, and expressing what you need to express when you need to express it, all of those things. I hope that is, a message that people can take from the play. And I think that, most art, if it's good art, speaks to your emotions, and helps you in some way, helps the human condition, and helps us manage it and understand it. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think we've possibly ended this by making it sound a little bit somber, and certainly at times it is sad and emotional. But I would say to anyone listening to this, we had a right laugh on the day we recorded.
There's a lot of joy in
there.
there.
There are so many jokes in there.
There's a lot of joy and nostalgia and happy memories and
fun
and humor.
Yeah, and I think at the end of it, we all had something in our eye as well, and needed to just take a moment, because we all experience this, don't we? And none of us have been exempt from that.
It is also that line, Chris, isn't it? Between, I mean, even when someone was dying, even sitting by someone's bed, there are moments of humor. It's just quintessentially human,
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ria and Carole, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Notes from Dad's Room. There will be a link somewhere near, down, up, wherever it will be, depending on what platform you're viewing this on. But do have a listen to it. If you need to search for it, if you can go to search alternative stories in any podcast player, and you will find it. And we really hope you enjoy listening to it. Ria and Carole, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Chris, for everything you've done on this and making it possible. This is Dad's room, where he's confined now, bedbound. This is my story and his.
Stopping the car in a lay-by, we get out quietly so as not to wake the others, and we look down at the winking lights of life below. Just Daddy and me.
Dispersible aspirin, 79 statin, 1 mil, colpamine 1 capsule, warfarin 1.5 milligrams, cosmicol half a sachet. He's admitted to a ward on the 4th floor. It's a spacious room of his own, clinical and clean, with a large window looking out into the hospital gardens.
Everything you will need is in here,
he says, as he struggles to sit up far enough to open the box. I hesitate to help.
Forgive my writing. It's not as neat anymore, but I think I've got most things covered.
Telling and retelling each other the stories of our lives, making some meaning, some proof of being here. We're in the business of making new memories now, too. We put his clothes in the locker and sit with him while he goes to sleep. The cherry blossom is in bloom.